One more cough. Hello, everyone. Okay, I'm sorry. Now you got me going now. Hello. Okay, game face. Yeah, you can leave it in if you want. Hello, everyone. I'm Billy.
And I'm Kamraun. Welcome to the Horse Frog Podcast, home of your two favorite professional digressors and the creators of the Malazan Brotherhood.
And today we will be discussing Book 2, Chapter 6 of Deadhouse Gates, a novel in the Malazan Books of the Fallen. This is part 3 of our coverage of this chapter.
This podcast series is intended to be a companion to reading or listening to the books set in the Malazan universe. It's not a book review, and it is most definitely not intended to be a replacement to reading the books. Both Billy and I know this to be the best fantasy story ever written and want to share our love of the series with you.
We will be covering the events of the books in a linear fashion. There will be spoilers for those that have not read the books, and we will try not to spoil anything prior to us covering that portion of the respective book. But knowing me and my big mouth, I'm sure to spoil it for someone at some point, maybe. I haven't done it yet, so I'm not really sorry, but I almost did last episode. So, but we're still good. So still not sorry.
Yeah, I also almost had a slip up last episode. So you are not alone, my friend.
We're close.
The razor's edge, if you will. A quick warning. Today's episode contains descriptions of explosive violence. Listener discretion is advised.
And our show is listener supported. If you'd like to support us, we would really appreciate that. And you can do so by visiting our Patreon link on our website at horsefrogproductions.com. Currently, we are posting ad-free episodes on Patreon.
Also, we'd really like to hear from you. Send any feedback or comments to contact@horsefrogproductions.com. And speaking of feedback, 2 weeks ago, we were discussing the way Felicin is processing the loss of Benneth.
Mm-hmm.
And I got a message from Dane, and he mentioned that it may be Stockholm Syndrome.
Right.
And I hadn't considered this as a possibility since normally I associate Stockholm Syndrome with somebody that's been kidnapped. And I didn't think Felicin was a kidnap victim. She's in this place. Benneth is also there. You know, he does have a position of power, but he's not really like a kidnapper. So I don't know. Do you think that's kind of similar psychological state?
Yeah, well, first off, Dane, is there such a thing as Stockholm Syndrome and woo? I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm not trying to be combative, Dane. I'm just teasing. I agree that this could be Stockholm Syndrome. I don't think I didn't know if it necessarily always applied to kidnappers and hostages. I always thought I think it may have come to the point where we've applied that to anyone that sympathizes with their victimizer.
Okay, I guess that's the only context I ever saw it in. So maybe that's just my misunderstanding. Okay,
and I think you're probably correct. If you want to be like factually correct, yes, but I think it's probably just kind of become to mean that here in the West. That when we think about that, I think it's just kind of anybody identifying with a victimizer.
All right. Well, thanks for bringing that up, Dane. Appreciate it, as
Dane.
Always. Put some stank on it, Billy. Jeez.
I'm sorry. I am just kidding. Thanks, Dane.
All right. There we go. We got a message from Slug, one of our Patreon subscribers from New Zealand. He pointed out a golden opportunity that we missed when we were discussing which Warren could cause someone to soil themselves. Slug proposes that it would be Mianus, as in, Mianus! And, I agree. That is most definitely a missed opportunity. It's hilarious. Great job on that one.
Yeah.
And thanks for your support.
Absolutely. Thanks, Slug. And absolutely brilliant.
Chapter 6, Part 3. We begin this section with Ikariam and Mappo in Tessem. They were in a chamber with a floor that sagged like a bowl. The chamber was roughly a third of a league into the hill's stone heart. In the center of the room lay a fishing boat resting on one flank. The dry, hot air had driven the dowels from the joins, and the planks had contracted, splaying beneath the boat's own weight. Mappo said, "This is no surprise." Ikariam's lips quirked slightly, then he stepped past Mappo and approached the vessel. He said, 5 years? Not longer. I can still smell the brine. Do you recognize the design? Mappo sighed. I curse myself for having taken no interest in such things. Truly, I should have anticipated moments like these. What was I thinking? Ikariam rested a hand on the prow of the ship and said, I believe this is what Iskarl Pust wished us to find. Mappo muttered, I thought the quest was for a broom. Ikariam said, No doubt his broom will turn up of its own accord. It was not the goal of the search we were to value, but the journey. Mappo's eyes narrowed suspiciously on Ikariam. Then he made an appreciative grin. He said, "That is always the way, isn't it? I smell no brine." Ikariam said, "Perhaps I exaggerated."
Real quick here, thank the Lord they didn't break out into song at the end of the word of value, but the journey. Sorry.
I mean, wise words.
They are wise words. I'm just saying that, I'm sorry. It's just my inner Trey Parker kind of jumps out on me, Matt Stone, where it's like, oh, that's a great spot for a musical number.
Mappo said, "I'll grant you it does not look like it's been here for centuries. What are we to make of this, Ikariam? A fishing boat, found in a room deep within a cliff in a desert 30 leagues from anything bigger than a spring. The high priest sets before us a mystery." Ikariam said, "Indeed." Mappo asked, "Do you recognize the style?" Ikariam said, "Alas, I am as ignorant of watercraft and other things of the sea as you, Mappo. I fear we have already failed in Iskarl Puss's expectations." Mappo grunted and watched Ikariam examine the boat. Ikariam said, "There are nets in here, deftly made. A few withered things that might have been fish once. Ah!" He reached down, then straightened and faced Mappo. In his hands, Pust's broom. Mappo asked, "Do we now sweep the chamber?" I love his sarcasm.
Oh, yeah. It's not as sarcastic as the boat repair Warren comment from Culp, but it is good sarcasm.
Oh, yeah, that was really good.
That was brilliant.
Dead face boat repair.
That was great. Boat repair.
Ikariam said, "I think our task is to return this to its rightful owner." Mappo asked, "The boat or the broom?"
Ooh.
Ikariam's brows rose and he said, "Now that is an interesting question, friend."
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
Mappo frowned, then shrugged. He was frustrated, having been underground too long and at the whim of a madman's schemes. After a long moment, Mappo sighed. Shadow swept down on this craft and its occupant, plucked them both away and delivered them here. Was this Puss's own boat? He hardly strikes me as from fisher bloodlines. I've not heard a single dockside curse pass his lips, no salty metaphors, no barbed catechisms. Ikariam said, "So, not Iskarl Puss's craft." Mappo said, "No," leaving. Ikariam noted, "Well, either the mule or servant." Mappo nodded and said, "I'll grant you a mule in a boat dragging nets through shoals might be interesting enough to garner a god's curiosity, sufficient to collect the two for posterity." Ikariam said, "Ah, but what would be the value without a lake or pond to complete the picture? No, I think we must eliminate the mule. This craft belongs to servant. Recall his adept climbing skills." Mappo said, "Recall the horrid soup." Ikariam corrected him. "That was laundry, Mappo." Mappo said, "Precisely my point, Ikariam. You are correct. Servant once plied waters in this boat." Ikariam said, "Then we are agreed." Mappo said, "Aye, hardly a move up in the world for the poor man." Ikariam shook himself. He raised the broom like a standard and said, "More questions for Iskarl Pust. Shall we begin the return journey, Mappo?" I really enjoy the way these two interact with each other under circumstances like this, when they're both behaving normally.
Right.
And Ikariam isn't in a strange mood and Mappo isn't racked by fear or guilt.
Right. Is this due to this being one of the only truly normal moments in this book? Because we don't have a lot of that. I mean, you get some with Crocus and Fiddler and Kalam early when they were in the boat a little bit. It's been a pretty escalation book. It's been like action upon action. So these are some kind of the normal, because, I mean, think about Mappo and Ikariam have been in some pretty hairy moments from, every time we see them, it's, facing some soul taker or divers or something, some craziness out there in the desert.
Yeah, we generally only get a real short little section where they're acting normally, just kind of joking around.
Yeah.
And Ikariam doesn't make some statement that Mappo is dreading where it's going or trying to steer the conversation in another direction.
Yeah, it's truly nice to see this.
3 hours later, the two found Iskarl Pust seated at the table in the library, hunched over a deck of dragons. He didn't look up and snapped, "You're late." The deck keens with fierce energy. "The world outside is in flux. Your love of ignorance is not worthy of these precipitous times. Attend this field, travelers, or remain lost at your peril." Mappo snorted in disgust and strode to the jugs of wine on a shelf. It seemed even Ikariam had been brought short by Pust's words as he dropped the broom on the floor and pulled back a chair opposite Iskarl Pust. The frustrated air about Ikariam did not make likely an afternoon of calm conversation. Mappo poured 2 cups of wine, then returned to the table. Pust raised the deck in both hands, closed his eyes, and breathed a silent prayer to Shadowthrone. He began a spiral field with the center card first. Pust squealed, "Obelisk!" and shifted nervously on his chair. He said, "I knew it! Past, present, future. The here, the now, the then, the when." Mappo breathed Hood's breath. The second card landed. Its upper left corner overlapped Obelisk's lower right. Pust exclaimed, "The rope. Shadow, patron of assassins. Ha! Opan, the male twin upright. The luck that pushes. Ill luck. Terrible misfortune. Miscalculation. Poor circumstance. Scepter. Throne. Queen of high house life. Spinner of high house death. Soldier of high house light. Knight of life. Mason of dark." A dozen more cards followed. Then Pust sat back. His eyes thinned to slits. His mouth hung open. I'm not sure what to make of this. Do you have any idea what's going on here? Do you want to try and identify any of these characters?
I can't think of any. I mean, there might be a couple that I might be able to think of, but I can't think of anybody. Is this kind of... I'm assuming this is just a normal reading, or this could be part of, Pust's, just his craziness could be showing.
Well, the readings we've seen, generally speaking, they are kind of up for interpretation by the person, right?
Yes.
What's immediately clear is somehow the rope is involved. Bad luck with Opan, that's pretty much spelled out. But when we start getting to like the Scepter Throne and the Queen of High House Life, and then the Spinner of High House Death, Soldier of High House Light, I can't think of the characters that would be playing these right now.
No.
Knight of Life, Mason of Dark. Mason of Dark, we have some ideas. That might be Fiddler.
Right. Or was that Shadow? Is that Dark or Shadow?
Well,
or Death? I never understood him.
Actually, he's not associated with Dark. I just thought Fiddler because
Mason.
He was a Mason just like Whiskey Jack was.
Yes. And it could be that maybe he is. I don't know.
He could also be Soldier of High House Light.
That's true because normally, if you're like me, what I've discovered with these readings is they usually spell out something as we've gone deep on our through gardens and this. There's usually things that come out in these readings that we're usually kind of able to go, oh, I didn't, nothing is going like that on this reading for me.
Mm-hmm.
Are you feeling the same way on that one, kind of for the most part?
Yeah, pretty confused. I think when we saw them in Gardens of the Moon, it's fairly obvious who was what.
Yeah, I can't remember. Also, was that at the beginning of Gardens? Was it more obscure to us because and this may be because this is some early on reading still. As we get later on in the book, if they have more readings, I can't remember if they do. I'm assuming there will be. There might be something more telling that we might see on our deep dig this time. I'm curious. We'll see.
Maybe. Yeah, we might have to come back if we can think of any associations here. I mean, Pust does do a little bit of interpretation here, but none of it really spells out specific individuals.
No. It's kind of like that old lady with Kalam and the Red Blades, but
Mm-hmm.
But that stuff made more sense than this one.
And that might just be Pust's madness coming through too.
Yeah, that's kind of what I'm just curious if it's this insanity creeping around the edges there.
All right. Pust said, "Renewal, a resurrection without the passage through Hood's gates. Renewal." He looked up, met Ikariam's eyes, and said, "You must begin a journey, soon." Ikariam asked, "Another quest?" His response was so quiet that Mappo's hackles rose in alarm. Pust said, "Aye, can you not see, fool?" Ikariam whispered, "See what?" Clearly ignorant that his life hung by a thread, Pust rose and wildly gestured at the field of cards. He said, "It's right here in front of you, idiot, as clear as my Lord of Shadow could make it. How have you survived this long?" In his frenzy, Pust snatched at the wispy patches of hair that remained on his head and yanked the tufts this way and that. He hopped in place and yelled, "Obelisk! Can't you see? Mason, Spinner, Scepter, Queens and Knights, Kings and Fools!" Ikariam moved lightning fast. Across the table, both hands closed around Pust's neck, then dragged him across the tabletop. Pust gurgled. His eyes bulged as he kicked feebly. Mappo said, "My friend." Ikariam threw Pust back down, shaken by his own anger. He drew a deep breath, then calmly said, "Speak plainly, priest." Pust writhed for a moment longer on the tabletop, then he stilled. He looked up at Ikariam with wide, tear-filled eyes. With a ravaged voice, he said, "You must venture forth into the holy desert." Ikariam asked, "Why?" Puss said, "Why? Why? Shaik is dead." Puss got really lucky there. Do you think he learned anything from this encounter?
Introducing EverythingMattersPod.com, the 7 times human body award-winning show and the planet's best program. Everything Matters is a surreal comedy horror podcast. Journey with our fearless hosts, Michael Torr and Dale Dallas, as they uncover the hidden gems and stories of Tri-Town. Don't forget to check out EverythingMattersPod.com, because everything matters, and it never ends.
No. Absolutely not.
Yeah.
Oh, I think this shows a lot of his power in a weird way, that he's able to divine Shaik's death. I think Paz is more powerful than we think. He is is he high mage?
Well, he's the high priest of the Temple of Shadow.
Does that make him a high mage, though?
I don't know if the two are synonymous with each other, but
Right.
we can assume that he has a very strong grasp of Shadow.
Yes. Too good of a grasp. I think the Shadow's got a grasp on him at this point.
It's a two-way street.
It is. It was a two-way street, I think.
Part of me wonders, maybe he doesn't have anything to learn because it's manipulation to begin with.
Yes.
Like, he's got Ikariam right where he wants him.
Yes, he does. It's weird to think of like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Pust is one of those guys, man. He's next level, even though he seems out of his mind, and he is. But part of it's crazy, and part of it's crafty.
Mm-hmm. Ikariam and Mappo sat in a vestibule in Mappo's quarters. Mappo slowly said, "We have to assume that the characteristic of never answering directly is bred into the man, as natural as breathing." Ikariam nodded and said, "He spoke of a resurrection. It must be considered, for this sudden death of Shaik seems to defy every prophecy, unless indeed the renewal marks a return from Hood's gates." Mappo said, "And Iskarl Pust expects us to attend this rebirth? How effortlessly he has ensnared us in his mad web. For myself, I am glad the witch is dead, and I hope she remains that way. Rebellion is ever bloody. If her death plucks this land back from the brink of mutiny, then to interfere would put us in great peril." Ikariam asked, "You fear the wrath of the gods?" Mappo said, "I fear being unwittingly used by them, or their servants, Ikariam. Blood and chaos is the wine and meat of the gods, most of them anyway, especially the ones eager to meddle in mortal affairs. I will do nothing to achieve their desires." I like that quote. Blood and chaos is the wine and meat of the gods. It's an apt description given what we've seen so far in these books.
Yeah, I think it's one of the more apt descriptions. It's almost like it's the core. It's almost one of the core concepts of the series, I guess, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's one of those. You have to look back on it and see it, but it's like that's kind of very true.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we can't say too much right now.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely feels that way. Ikariam said, "Nor I, friend. Nonetheless, I would witness such a resurrection. What deceit has the power to wrest a soul from Hood's clasp? Every ritual of resurrection I have ever heard attempted inevitably resulted in a price beyond reckoning. Even as he relinquishes a soul, Hood ensures he wins in the exchange." That's a bit like the monkey's paw, isn't it?
Yes, it's very much like that.
Mappo closed his eyes, then kneaded his brow. He thought, "My friend, what are we doing here? I see your desperation, seeking every path in the hopes of revelation. Could I speak openly to you, I would warn you from the truth." I prefer sarcastic Mappo to guilt-ridden Mappo like we see here. It's such a great toll on him.
Oh, I agree. It's nice to see him not being a morose son of a gun here. It's like actually kind of enjoying the diversion with him and Ikariam having something to do. Ikariam's distracted. This is a good thing for him.
Yeah, like the bro moments are better than one of them being racked by guilt.
Yes.
Mappo softly said, "This is an ancient land. We cannot guess what powers have been invested in the stone, sand, and earth, generation upon generation. When we wandered the edge of Raraku, Ikariam, I always felt as if I was walking the narrowest strand, in a web stretching to every horizon. The ancient world but sleeps, and I feel its restless shifting more now than ever before." He thought, "Do not awaken this place, friend, lest it awaken you." After a long moment, Ikariam said, "Well, I shall venture out in any case. Will you accompany me, Mappo Trell?" Mappo looked at the floor, then slowly nodded. We are taken to Fiddler, Crocus, and Apsalar. They sat on their lathered mounts at the top of a trail that led down the slope of the hills out onto the desert wastes. A wall of sand rose in front of them and blocked their vision from the holy desert Raraku. They heard a faint roar. I'm sure that would be quite the sight, standing in front of a wall of sand like that. Pretty intimidating.
And this is another one of these core memory images here. This wall of sand, it's a character almost itself in the book at some points later on. Because it's a barrier. It's a barrier, and it's something that's constantly talked about. It's referred to. We see it. We're in it. We're outside of it. It's kind of all. So it's a very much a character. It's very much something.
Yeah. I mean, some of the stuff we're about to go through here, you see why it's so important. First of all, the visual, but then also what is uncovered with all the sand coming up in the air, that kind of stuff. Yeah, we'll get into it. Crocus quietly said, "Not your average storm, I assume." Moby had once again disappeared, and Fiddler suspected they wouldn't see it again. This had affected Crocus's mood negatively. After a moment, Crocus went on. "When I heard mention of the whirlwind, I assumed it was, well, figurative. A state of being, I suppose. So tell me, do we now look upon the true whirlwind, the wrath of a goddess?" Apsalar wondered, "How can a rebellion be born in the heart of that? It would be a challenge to even open one's eyes in that storm, much less orchestrate a continent-wide uprising, unless, of course, it's a barrier, and beyond there is calm." Crocus said, "Seems likely." Fiddler grunted, "Then we've no choice. We ride through." The Grawl hunters were less than 10 minutes behind them. They rode equally exhausted horses and numbered at least a score. The option of making a stand against the warriors was not a promising prospect. Fiddler looked at his companions. They looked hungry, thirsty, weaving in their saddles with exhaustion. He was in as bad a shape and didn't have the reserves of youth to draw upon. He thought, "Mind you, Raraku mocked me once before, long ago. I know what's out there." Crocus and Apsalar instinctively understood Fiddler's hesitation. They waited with something like respect, even as the sound of thundering horse hooves rolled up the trail at their backs. Apsalar finally said, "I wish to know more of this desert, its power." Fiddler growled, "You shall. Wrap up your faces. We go to greet the whirlwind." The storm closed around them. Sand reached relentlessly past the folds of their talaban. Loose cloth and rope ends spiked upward and whipped with urgent rhythm. The roar filled the air. Raraku had awakened. All that Fiddler had sensed the last time he rode these wastes, sensed as an underlying restlessness, the spectral promise of nightmares beneath the surface, was now unleashed, exultant with freedom. Heads ducked, the horses plodded onward. The ground underneath was hard-packed clay and rubble. The once deep cloak of fine white sand had been lifted from the surface. The group dismounted, hooded their mounts' heads, then led them on. Bones appeared underfoot, rusting lumps of armor, chariot wheels, remnants of horse and camel tack, pieces of leather, the humped foundation stones of wall. What had been a featureless desert now showed its bones, and they crowded the floor in such profusion as to leave Fiddler in awe. He could not take a step without something crunching underfoot. That's so crazy, all this stuff hidden under the sand like that.
Oh, I know. Think about it, though. There are a lot. I mean, we have a lot of civilizations that are buried in our own deserts, that we assume are buried in our deserts.
Yeah.
That's something that's always fascinated me, especially because I'm a Bible reader a lot. There's a lot of stuff that's buried under there that I want to know. I don't know if you've been keeping up with this. We think that they found Sodom.
Oh, no, I haven't heard that.
Yeah, that's we're pretty sure we've actually found it. It's one of these things, that we've. There's so many cities and so many histories from the world and biblical history that are not found. But every time you find this stuff from the Bible stuff, I always love it. I'm like, right on, that's cool.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, not even just these really old places, even where we live. I've done a couple excavations just in my backyard, and I find things from when they built the house 30 years ago, that's just thrown on the ground. It makes you wonder how much stuff is just buried out there. Stuff from the World Wars, or even, like the Civil War. They're finding cannonballs and crazy amounts of stuff buried.
Going back to the desert in the Middle East, I know for a fact in places like Damascus and Syria and all these the old ancient seats of civilization, where they've built consistently on top of each other, like Jerusalem. And that's like 30 to 60 foot up higher than the original foundations were on everything. Because anything we locate is buried deep, because they keep, they would be destroyed. They'd build on top of the ruins. You get destroyed, they'd build on top of the ruins. So some of those ancient places, they've done that a lot. It's kind of funny to think about all even the trash from a civilization tells us a lot. I'm always fascinated by that too. I guess this is Erikson's, of course, specialty. I'm sure that fella's dug through many ancient dumps.
Yeah, I think I recently heard that they were doing some street work in Rome, and they uncovered some Roman road that was built under that.
That's wild.
Same type of concept,
Yeah, that just blows me away.
On top of all this stuff.
I used to live in a house myself, and it was funny because I was the first person to live in that house. And yes, we still find nails and things from when they built that thing. And of course, I've had my roof replaced 2 or 3 times there because of hail. So because of that, it's amazing the things that just get left in your yard. What are the ancient civilizations going to think about us when they find us and go, there's a lot of crappy metal.
All these shingles.
Yes, it's like shingles.
Yeah.
Kind of, what is this?
The strangest thing I found was a fire poker.
That's kind of spooky.
Yeah, I thought it was like a gas line at first because I found the middle of it.
You wonder, was somebody killed? It's like it was somebody.
I don't know. I hope not.
I hope not too.
I still have it. I'm using it.
Well, you could have the key piece of evidence for some, some years old.
I hope not.
Case. I hope not.
It was all rusted. All right, moving on. A high stone-lined bank suddenly blocked their way. It was sloped and rose to well above their heads. Fiddler paused for a long moment, then he gathered his mount's reins and led the climb. They eventually reached the top and found themselves on a road. The paving stones were exquisitely cut, evenly set, with the thinnest of cracks visible between them. Fiddler crouched down to study the road's surface. There was no telling its age. While he imagined that, even buried beneath the sands, there would be signs of wear, he could detect none. Moreover, the engineering showed skill beyond any masonry he'd yet seen in 7 cities. To his right and left, the road ran spear shaft straight, as far as his squinting eyes could see. It stood like a vast breakwater that even his sorcerous storm could not breach. And that must have been a pretty advanced society to create such a masterpiece.
I know. This is one of those, I don't know why this image has stuck with me, because it's just interesting. We know it's an ancient highway of sorts, but that it's so straight and that it shows no wear. I've always, and the fact that he doesn't really explain much about it, I don't think this is ever explained. There may be hints at where this led at some point. I think sometimes Erikson doesn't give you everything, and I always appreciated that about him. Let you kind of have some of this stuff in your mind. Some of these mysteries that hang out in our brain are what makes things so good to me.
Mm-hmm.
I think there must have been some great civilization in the center of this continent at some point. Well, and because of everything that's being hinted at with the Holy Falad, those 7 dudes. I'm curious. Well, we'll learn more, I know, as we go on this story, but I love it what it hints at, though.
Right. Crocus leaned close and shouted, "I thought there were no roads in Raraku." Fiddler shook his head at a loss to explain. Crocus asked, "Do we follow it? The wind's not as bad up here." As far as Fiddler could judge, the road angled southwestward, deep into the heart of Raraku. To the northeast, it would reach the Panpotson Hills. Within 10 leagues in that direction, they would come to the hills perhaps 5 leagues south of where they had left them. There seemed little value in that. He stared again down the road to his right. He thought, the heart of Raraku. It is said an oasis lies there, where Shaik and her renegades are encamped. How far to that oasis? Can water be found anywhere between here and there? Surely a road crossing a desert would be constructed to intersect sources of water. It was madness to think otherwise, and clearly the builders of this road were too skilled to be fools. Tremor lore. If the gods will it, this track will lead us to that legendary gate. Raraku has a heart, Quick Ben said. Tremor lore, a house of the Azath. This is the first mention in the book that their destination is Tremor lore.
Yes. Yes, it is.
Additionally, this is the first reveal that they seek a house of the Azath.
Right.
And as a quick reminder, the house that formed in Simtal's garden from the acorn Finest was also in Azath. So that gives you a little bit of a idea of what type of powers we're dealing with here in this place that they're searching for. Fiddler mounted the Grawl gelding. Over the roar he yelled, "We follow the road," and gestured southwestward. They voiced no complaints. They had bowed to his command, Fiddler realized, because both were lost in this land. They relied on him completely. He thought, Hood's breath. They think I know what I'm doing. Should I now tell them that the plan to find Tremorlore rests entirely on the faith that the fabled place actually exists, and that Quick Ben's suppositions are accurate despite his unwillingness to explain the source of his certainty? Do I tell them we're more likely to die out here than anything else, if not from wasting thirst, than at the hands of Shaik's fanatical followers? And this sounds like a long shot, definitely one of Quick Ben's mad schemes.
Oh, man. That guy's playing 5D chess while the rest of those guys are pitching pennies.
Yep. He's always got the big picture and leaves everybody else in the dark.
Right.
Crocus cried out, "Fid," and pointed up the road. Fiddler spun around to see a handful of Grawl warriors as they ascended the bank, less than 50 paces away. Their hunters had split up into smaller parties. A moment later, they saw their quarry and voiced faint war cries as they pulled their horses onto the flat top. Apsalar asked, "Do we run?" The Grawl had remounted and were now unslinging their lances. Fiddler muttered, "Looks like they're not interested in conversation." In a louder voice, he said, "Leave them to me. You two ride on." Crocus slid off his horse and asked, "What, again? What would be the point?" Apsalar followed suit and stepped close to Fiddler. Her eyes met his. She asked, "With you dead, what are our chances of surviving this desert?" Fiddler thought, "About as bad as with me leading you." He fought the temptation to give voice to his thought and shrugged in reply as he unlimbered his crossbow. He said, "I mean to make this a short engagement," and loaded a cusser quarrel into the weapon slot. It's about to go down for these dudes.
Yeah, it's about to get ugly.
The Grawl had pulled their mounts into position on the road. Lances lowered, they kicked the horses into motion. Fiddler's heart broke for those Grawl horses, even as he aimed and fired. The quarrel struck the road 3 paces in front of the charging tribesmen. The detonation was deafening, the blast a gout of flame that drove back the airborne sand and the wind carrying it, and flung the attackers and their mounts like a god's hand, backward onto the road and off the sides. Blood shot upward to pull sand down like hail. In a moment, the wind swept the flames and smoke away, leaving nothing but twitching bodies. And that's quite effective. The power of the Malazan sapper is on full display there.
Yeah, I mean, it's like these guys, I love it. They think they got him dead to rights. They roll up on him, and it's just like it's over. One shot, boom.
A new kung fu science fiction podcast featuring music by Wu-Tang Clan producer Silver Rings, about 5 criminals on a dangerous hunt for the biggest score in the history of New York City. Not only big enough to change each of their hard-boiled lives, but the order of the world itself. 5 Deadly Rebels, streaming anywhere you get your podcasts. Presented by Dimension Gate.
Fiddler thought, a pointless pursuit, and now pointless deaths. I am not Grawl. Would the crime of impersonation trigger such a relentless hunt? I wish I could have asked you, warriors. Crocus said, "For all that they have twice saved us, those Maranth munitions are horrible, Fiddler." Silent, Fiddler loaded another quarrel, slipped a leather thong over the bone trigger to lock it, then slung the heavy weapon over his shoulder. Yeah, on the point of them being terrible, he's carrying that stuff around in his backpack.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes, he is.
Highly volatile explosives.
It's like, have you ever seen those old movies? There's a movie by William Freak, and he was the director of The Exorcist. And this is after The Exorcist. Now, I only know about this because he just died recently. But it's called Sorcerer, and it's about some kind of mercenary type fellas running nitroglycerin in South America. And it's There's another old Western movie I've seen where people are driving carts carrying nitroglycerin, and that's, and they're carrying that stuff suspended, in all kinds of ways to keep it from being rattled and shaken. And it's like, and he's on a horse. It's
Mm.
kind of trotting along, bouncing along. It's like, wow. So that stuff's more stable than nitro, if that says anything about the Morant.
Yeah, it's a solid powder. It has to be exposed to air, right?
Yes.
For it to explode.
Yes.
Yeah, so the clay around it is insulating it from the atmosphere.
Yes, but if you drop that backpack, it could get ugly real quick.
Yes, real quick. Fiddler climbed back into the saddle and gathered the reins in one hand and regarded his comrades. He said, "Stay sharp. We may ride into another party without warning. If we do, try to break through them." He lightly kicked the mare forward. The wind came as laughter to his ears, the sound seemingly stained with pleasure at witnessing senseless violence. It was eager for more. He thought, "The whirlwind awakened. This goddess is mad, riven with insanity. Who is there that can stop her?" His slitted eyes stared down the road, the stones leading into an ochre swirling maw, into nothingness. Fiddler growled an oath, pushing away the futility clawing at his thoughts. They would have to find Tremorlore before the whirlwind swallowed them whole. We are taken to Kalam. The Aptorian strode 30 paces to his left. Kalam found himself thankful for the storm. His every clear sighting of his unwanted companion scraped his nerves raw. He'd encountered demons before, on battlefields and in war-ravaged streets. Often they had been thrown into the fray by Malazan mages, and so were allies of a sort, even as they went about exacting the wills of their masters with apparent indifference to all else. On thankfully rarer occasions, he'd come face to face with a demon unleashed by an enemy. At such times, survival was his only concern, and survival meant flight. Demons were flesh and blood. To be sure, he'd seen enough of one's insides once, after it had been blown apart by one of Hedge's cusser quarrels, to retain the unwelcome intimacy of the memory. But only fools would try to face down a demon's cold rage and singularity of purpose. Only two kinds of people die in battle, Fiddler had once said. Fools and the unlucky. Trading blows with a demon was both unlucky and foolish. I had this quote highlighted. Fiddler's endless wisdom on display there.
Yes, I'm assuming achieved through the School of Hard Knocks.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Yeah, also note the mention of Hedge using a cusser quarrel to dispatch a demon, just as he had against Mammoth Possessed at the end of Gardens of the Moon.
Yep.
Then, as we just saw with Fiddler against the Grawl Hunters.
And also, let's not forget Fiddler with the Soul Taken Denrabi.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Good call there.
Another good Morant munition against, he wasn't a demon, but just as bad.
Yeah. For all that, the Aptorian grated strangely on Kalam's eyes. To focus too long on the beast was to invite a wave of nausea. There was nothing welcome in Shaik's gift or spy. She unleashed the whirlwind, and now the goddess rides her, as certain as possession. Dryjna would not so readily waste an Aptorian demon on something so mundane as escort. Kalam thought, "So, friend Apt, I cannot trust you." Over the past few days, he'd tried losing the beast. Outracing the creature was a hopeless task. It could outpace any earthly animal in both speed and endurance. And for all his efforts, Apt held on to him like a well-heeled hound, although mercifully at a distance. He'd left Panpotson Hills behind 6 days earlier, crossing the seamless border into another saw-backed ridge of hills called the Anabaj. The territory this far south of Raraku was less familiar to him. He'd come close on occasion, following the well-traveled trader tracks skirting the eastern edge of the range. The Anabaj were home to no tribes, although hidden monasteries were rumored to exist. The whirlwind had rolled out of Raraku the night before, a tidal wave of sorcery that left Kalam shaken despite his anticipating its imminent arrival. Dryjna had awakened with a hunger fierce enough to render Kalam appalled. He feared he would come to regret his role, and every sighting of Apt only deepened that fear. The Anabaj were lifeless to Kalam's eyes. He'd seen no sign of habitation, disguised or otherwise. The occasional stronghold ruin hinted at a more crowded past, but that was all. And yet Kalam could not shake the sense that something was trailing him. The awareness had risen within him over the past 6 hours. A presence was out there. human or beast beyond the range of his sight, following, somehow clinging to his trail. Unless the hunter's vision was superior to his, which he did not think likely, so that he was able to stay just beyond Kalam's own range, the only explanation he was left with was hood-spawned sorcery. He thought, the last thing I need.
Mm-hmm.
Abruptly, the wind fell, the roar shifting to the hiss of settling sand. Grunting in surprise, Kalam reined in and looked back over his shoulder. The storm's edge was a tumbling stationary wall 5 paces behind him. Sand rained from it, forming scalloped dunes along a slightly curving edge that ran to the horizon's edge, both east and west. Overhead, the sky had lightened to a faintly burnished copper. The sun, hanging an hour above the western horizon, was the color of beaten gold. And that's so cool. A sorcerous wall of sand. I love that visual, especially with the sand raining down as it calms down.
Yeah, that's really awesome. And like I said, this is a great the core memory here. Just that wall hanging there all the time. That's very impressive.
Kalam walked his horse another dozen paces, then halted a second time. Apt had not emerged from the storm. A shiver of alarm took hold, and he reached for the crossbow hanging from its strap on the saddle horn. A jolt of sudden panic took his horse, and the beast shied sideways, head lifted and ears flattened. A strong, spicy smell filled the air. Kalam rolled from the saddle even as something passed swiftly through the air over him. He relinquished his grip on the unloaded crossbow. Kalam unsheathed both long knives even as his right shoulder struck the soft sand. His momentum took him over and onto his feet in a low crouch. His attacker, a desert wolf of startling mass, had failed in clearing the sidestepping horse and now scrambled for purchase athwart the saddle, its amber eyes fixed on Kalam. Is this desert wolf Rilandaris?
You know, it could be. I don't know. I don't know if it ever. I don't think it answers that either. But it could very well be that he's the only desert wolf we know of, isn't it? And he was a big fella.
And it was the one that wanted to go hunt Apt to begin with.
Yes. So you're probably right. It's probably Rilandaris.
Oh wow.
If that's the case, then that's more. Then that's
Kalam's having a tough time right now.
Yeah, then that's more impressive.
Kalam lunged forward and thrust with the narrow blade in his right hand. Another wolf struck him from the left and took him to the ground. His left arm was pinned by the beast's weight. Long canines gouged into the mail links that covered his shoulder. Rings popped and snapped. The teeth broke through and pushed hard against his flesh. Kalam reached around and drove the point of his right long knife high into the animal's flank. The blade slipped under the spine just forward of the wolf's hip. The jaws released his shoulder. The animal jerked back and kicked to pull away from him. As Kalam struggled to pull the blade free, he felt the edge bite bone. The Aaron steel bent, then snapped. You hate to see it. It's always a shame when a blade is damaged like this.
Oh, especially in this place where losing any weapon is truly a loss.
Yeah. The wolf howled in pain and leapt away, back hunched. It spun as if chasing its tail in an effort to close its jaws on the jutting fragment of blade. Kalam rolled to his feet. The first wolf had been thrown from its purchase across the saddle by the horse's frenzied bucking. It had then taken a solid kick to the side of the head. The beast stood dazed half a dozen paces away. Blood ran from its nose. There were others, somewhere behind the storm wall, their growls, yips, and snarls muted by the wind. They battled something, it was obvious. Kalam recalled Shaik's mention of a divers that had attacked the Aptorians some weeks earlier. It seemed the shapeshifter was trying again.
I think that does answer the... Did Rilandaris encounter that fellow before? So if that's the case, then this is indeed Rilandaris.
Yeah. When Mappo and Ikariam came across Rilandaris, they had both seen the Aptorian, and Rilandaris mentioned that it wanted to hunt it down.
Yes. So I think this is confirmation.
Wow. Kalam saw his horse bolt away down the trail, southward, bucking as it went. He spun back to the two wolves, only to find them gone. Twin spattered paths of blood led back into the storm. From within the whirlwind, all sounds of battle had ceased. A moment later, Apt lumbered into view. Dark blood streamed from its flanks and dripped from its needle fangs. It swung its elongated head and regarded Kalam with its black, knowing eye. Kalam scowled and said, "I risk enough without this damned feud of yours, Apt." The demon clacked its jaws, a snake-like tongue darting out to lick the blood from its teeth. He saw it was trembling. Some of the puncture wounds near its neck looked deep. Kalam sighed and said, "Treating you will have to await finding my horse." He reached for the small canteen at his belt and said, "But at the very least, I can clean your wounds." He stepped forward. Apt flinched back, its head ducked menacingly. Kalam stopped. He frowned and said, "Perhaps not then." There was something odd about the demon. It stood on a low hump of bleached bedrock, its head turned as its slitted nostrils flared to test the air. Kalam's frown deepened. After a long moment, he sighed and glanced down at the grip of the broken long knife in his right hand. He'd carried the matched pair for most of his adult life, like a mirror to the twin loyalties within him. He thought, which of the two have I now lost?
Good question.
Yeah, that is a good question. He brushed dust from his talaba, collected his crossbow, then slung it over a shoulder and began to walk southward, down the trail toward the distant basin. Alongside him, and closer now, Apt followed, head sunk low, its single forelimb kicking up puffs of dust that glowed pink in the sun's failing light. Real quick, what do you think he meant when he said there was something odd about the demon? Did you pick up anything there?
Well, remember earlier, you mean talking about Apt?
Yeah, because he said when Apt flinched back, he stopped approaching and said, "Perhaps I won't treat you then." He noted there was something odd about it.
Maybe because this one, like it's been mentioned that he's supposed to be mindless, but it's talked about that knowing look in its eye, and they say, "Oh, it's not." It was Leoman that said something to him about that. Oh, it looks like it knows what it's, but it doesn't know anything. It's really quite stupid. But I think there's more to Apt.
Oh, okay.
But I believe there's more to Apt than we think. I mean, it's not. I don't think it's just.
Okay, so maybe he's picking up on some intelligence.
I think that's kind of what it is, because it flinching back like it was, like almost ready to fight him for wanting to clean him up, because he didn't know what to how to think about Kalam almost.
Right. All right, and that brings us to the end of the chapter.
Good chapter.
What an action-packed chapter.
Hey, 3 weeks worth of action-packed chapter. Yes,
all of it. Not just this episode today. Yes, yeah.
Good stuff.
A lot of meat.
Yes.
All right. For standout moments, the sarcastic interaction between Mappo and Ikariam as they discussed the ship they found under Tessum was enjoyable.
That's really fun stuff with them guys. Kind of letting their hair down a little bit,
Yeah. And then Puss getting a little rude with Ikariam and being put in his place.
Yeah, that was very dangerous, but I love that they were right. It seems like still nothing was ever answered, and they're still going to do what he wants him to do anyhow. So it's, I guess brilliantly done. Yeah, good job, Puss.
It seems to be working. The visual of the wall of sand in front of Fiddler and Company, and then also like when Kalam comes out the other side of it. Yes. I just love the idea of that. I would love to see something like that in real life. It'd be crazy.
Oh, I know it. And like I stated earlier, this has always been a core memory for me, that the wall, and the fact that, like we'd already discussed this, but the fact that the wall is in and of itself a player in the upcoming conflict for this book.
Yeah. I really like the idea that all the sand has been lifted off the floor of the desert to reveal all the history that's buried there. Interesting concept.
And this is always, again, something that has always fascinated me. I think you and I both have always been fascinated by deserts. I don't know, but a lot of mine is always, I'm drawn to what lay beneath and the stuff from the ancient times,
Yeah, I think for me, I just like the environment.
I get it.
And the weather.
Sure.
And the beauty of it, really.
Sure. It's quite beautiful. It's quite breathtaking, actually.
Maybe I just want to be a Fremen.
I think that's what it is. I think that's really truly what it is. I want to live and die on Arrakis.
Yeah. Yeah. I'll die riding a sandworm out into the desert.
Yes. Absolutely. I'm down with that. Absolutely. 100%, dude.
I enjoyed the revelation that Fiddler and Company are seeking Tremorlor, a house of the Azath.
Now that is very important, and I'm gonna make a huge digression on something we just talked about in our Dune reference. The horrifying thing about the Dune and the Fremen is that, think about Kalam and what an elite he is. How would he fare against Fremen?
I think they're about the same level.
That's kind of what I think.
I kind of think of Kalam.
That's kind of what I think too. That's exactly what I think. He's there.
Yeah, but what does that say about the Fremen, though? Man.
Oh, they're beasts, dude. We know they're beasts.
Kalam's just an animal.
Yeah.
Well, I think so. You got a whole army of these Fremen.
Exactly. I think the children, are as volatile and as bad as Kalam in the Fremen world. So in Dune. So yeah, we know what an unstoppable army they are. They take out the Sardaukar, for goodness sake. The most feared fighting force in the galaxy.
Mm-hmm. I enjoyed seeing Fiddler's effective use of the Cusser to defend them against the attacking Grawl. Though I also was kind of sad for those Grawl horses, knowing how magnificent they are.
That's true, but at least Fiddler still has the face biting beast he's got. I love it, so there is at least that. He's still got that horse.
Yeah,
I love any Marantz munitions on display. It's always quite impressive and it's usually quite humorous. It's humorous for me and not for the people who it's being used upon.
Yeah, there's a couple instances I can think of specifically. We're probably thinking of one of the same ones right now that are just hilarious.
Yes, I'm sure we are.
Feel bad for those guys.
Yeah.
And then Kalam's battle with the divers, who turned out to be Rillandaris. The first time I read through, I hadn't put that together, but man, that's a serious fight right there.
To know that he's holding his own with the help of Apt against this, what is he, a first hero? Is that what Rillandaris is?
That's how I took it. I think so.
So Kalam is a beast. He's absolute beast.
Yeah,
and
did really well. He also sensed that he was being trailed by it too, so that's pretty impressive as well.
I like that. And I think the other thing I really enjoyed about this interaction was I liked Kalam even being concerned enough, even though Apt freaks him out and how much he talked about just seeing him grates on his nerves. It's just like a wound, and seeing anything from another dimension might be that way. I get it. But he's still, it's like this thing helped him out, and obviously fought off Rillandaris as well. So he's trying to help him out. So I like seeing him try to help clean Apt's wounds.
Yeah, that was pretty neat.
Yeah.
Really
I like
nice
that interaction.
Stuff he was doing there. Yeah, definitely. All right, dude. Great job tonight.
Yeah, great episode, man. Well, it's a great chapter.
Agreed. Did you have any final thoughts before we drop off here?
I was just going to say, great episode. Such an action-packed chapter, and I love seeing it start to from the beginning of this chapter. It was heating up, and it just kept heating up all through the chapter. Man, absolutely amazing.
Cool. All right, everybody. Thanks. We'll see you next week.
Hey, see y'all next week.
We thank you all for joining us today.
Again, we really like to thank you for taking the time to be with us, and we've had a really great time talking about the topic today.
If you would like to support our show, you can find us at horsefrogproductions.com, where you can find our Patreon link. Depending on the platform you're listening from, it may also be in the episode description.
And if you'd like to contact us through email, it's at contact@horsefrogproductions.com.